But, but, but why would they waste the time and energy to make the rivets flush with the surface? If they're gonna just drop the tank once, they're just using it once, they're just gonna drop it, right? Why? It doesn't make sense. Yeah. Okay. See ya. August 26, 1951. Talks to hopefully negotiate a peace settlement or an armistice began back July 10th at Kaesong. For 6 weeks they've continued, and this week the Chinese break off the talks. I'm Indy Neidell, and this is the Korean War. Last week, the UN forces began a new offensive, as the ROK, the South Koreans, attacked a couple of ridges near a formation known to many as the Punch Bowl. I also mentioned an incident at the end of last week where a Chinese MP platoon was ambushed near a village in the neutral zone. The UN investigates, but the communist side is certainly making the most of the situation. They recessed the talk session early the 20th for communist representatives to attend the funeral of the platoon leader who was killed, and they invite American General Henry Hodes and Admiral Arleigh Burke to attend. Those two are two of the UN delegates for the ceasefire negotiations. Well, what do? If they accept, they are well aware there will be Chinese and North Korean photographers at the funeral who will take loads of photos and maybe distort the reason they're there for propaganda purposes. They do not accept. Thing is, despite conflicting testimony, investigations showed the patrol had been ambushed, but that no UN or ROK units had been close to Songgong-ni at that time, since some witnesses stated that several members of the attacking force had worn civilian clothes and had been seen in the area before. The UNC officers surmised that they were partisans friendly to the ROK, but acting independently. Needless to say, the communists were not satisfied with this explanation and made full use of the incident for propaganda purposes. Because of stuff like this, and times when the communists had pretty blatantly violated the agreements, UN Commander Matt Ridgway has wanted to break off talks several times, but Washington, especially President Harry Truman, has not allowed this, with the result that, having pushed Washington and found no resistance, the communists continued their charges of violations, making new charges almost daily. The biggest one of these comes now on the 22nd, just about midnight. A Chinese liaison officer, Colonel Chang, calls UN liaison officer Andrew Kinney and tells him that American planes have strafed and bombed the Kaesong conference area. Kinney thinks this is ridiculous, but with UN Chief Delegate Turner Joy's approval, he goes to check it out. He gets there around 1:45 in the morning in the pouring rain to find Chang and a bunch of communist reporters in a somewhat excitable mood. Chang says that everyone at Kaesong heard a plane approaching and then a bomb exploding. He also has physical evidence, a crumpled chunk of metal that looks like part of an airplane's oil tank or something similar, and a little hole in the ground, or more of a depression, a bit less than a meter wide and maybe 25 centimeters deep. The communists claim the bomb had been napalm, but it doesn't look to Kinney like anything has been burning here, and he thinks a partly buried grenade could have made the hole. Also, the metal on the tank thing is flush riveted. But if it had been an American napalm tank, it wouldn't be, since it could be much rougher because it was only going to be used once. It was only going to be dropped. He soon had enough of the Chinese show. "I'm getting impatient with this nonsense," Kinney said, whereupon a Chinese soldier stepped forward to claim he had seen an American plane with its lights on during the raid, an absurdity to Kinney because no pilot goes into combat with his plane illuminated. As Kinney turned to walk away, Chang thrust his hand into his tunic pocket and pulled out a sheaf of prepared notes. Armistice talks were being suspended indefinitely, he declared. The whole circus of that night has Ridgway convinced they set up the whole thing with the evidence just as a pretext to end the talks. But why now? What could they gain? Ridgway speculates they might be stalling truce talks now because of coming talks in San Francisco to write a peace treaty with the Japanese that officially ends World War II. The Chinese are possibly thinking they could maybe get something from that, like a truce in Korea for some sort of role in post-war Japan. This particular episode, though, is pretty clearly designed to blame the UN for the talks ending now. In fact, when Kinney and company drive away, they are overtaken by the Communist Liaison Group, who want them to come back and finish the investigation. Kinney says he wants to wait until daylight, but they say there's new evidence. Reluctantly, Kinney returned and was shown 2 more small holes, several small burned patches, and some pieces of aircraft metal. There was an odor of gasoline and a substance in one of the holes that might have been low-grade napalm that had not been ignited. When the UN investigators requested that all the evidence remain in place until it could be inspected by daylight, the communists refused. They intended to gather it all for analysis and considered the investigation over. There are a number of reasons why this is likely a deliberate setup by the communists. For one, 5th Air Force says it had no planes in the area. 2, the supposed plane had its lights on. 3, the bomb pattern of the holes is such that investigators are pretty sure no single plane could have made them. 4, the haste and eagerness of the communists to gather up all the fragments as soon as possible is suspect. But 5, the speed at which a low-level liaison officer could actually call off the talks tells Ridgway this decision was made in advance at a top level. But whatever the case, the talks are now broken off, and who knows when or if they will resume. But the active war resumed last week when the ROK, South Koreans, launched 2 offensives near what the UN forces call the Punch Bowl. Those offensives continue this week. 3 divisions are attacking the J-shaped ridge northeast of the Punch Bowl. ROK 8th Division is attacking north against the hook of the J, while ROK 11th and Capital Divisions from Paek Sun-yup's ROK 1st Corps are hitting the east and southeast against its backbone. Thing is, their attacks do reach their objectives on the ridges, but they're not reinforced quickly enough to withstand the inevitable enemy counterattacks. All week long, this pattern of attack and counterattack continues without any real decision. As for the attacks against the ridge west of the Punch Bowl, which by now is getting the name Bloody Ridge, it's tough. ROK 36 Regiment does take Hill 773 by the evening of the 20th. Although the South Koreans hold the summit, the situation becomes close to a crisis. Ammunition and supplies have been greatly depleted during the heated contest, and still the remaining hills must be secured. Hills 940 and 983 also fall to the South Koreans the 21st, and that night there is no counterattack, so they get a breather. But on the 22nd, the ROK, who have gained their objectives, are given further hills to take, a ridge slightly to the north. But it's obvious to all and sundry by now, the North Koreans are not going to voluntarily withdraw, and it's going to be another bloody fight. The ROK 36 does manage to take the ridge, but by then they've also taken nearly 1,000 casualties. Seeing them, well, more than decimated, American observers tell U.S. 2nd Division Commander Clark Ruffner that they need help. He asks Jim Van Fleet if he can move up the 9th Infantry onto the ridge with them. Van Fleet was furious. He had made the rehabilitation of the ROK Army a personal project, and he was determined to demonstrate the project's success to the United Nations and the world. He told Ruffner, "You are trying to hog the glory from the rocks." A few hours later, a huge KPA, North Korean, counterattack drives ROK 36 off the ridge again. Now there's no other choice but to throw in the 9th Infantry. We'll see how they do next week. It's not just the North Korean soldiers to deal with, They've also laid minefields, and they have bunkers that are so strong, only an absolute direct hit can take one out. So the KPA are just sitting in those bunkers with loads of hand grenades and automatic weapons until the UN air raids and artillery barrages end. Then when the UN troops try to climb the slopes, the North Koreans come out into their firing positions and rain hell down on the attackers. There's something that is also having an effect on the UN forces fighting the war that I haven't talked about for quite a while. Troops rotating in and out of the front lines. T.R. Fehrenbach wrote this lovely sentence: "In any democratic society, equality of sacrifice is a cherished ideal. Yet in war, nothing is more difficult of attainment." Soldiers know that they're not sharing the load completely, right? 3 guys go through basic training. One's posted to Korea in the thick of the action. One goes to Europe, never sees any action at all. One never even leaves the States. But once you're in the action as a combat soldier, you have 4 ways of getting away from that action: death, injury, insanity, or rotation out of the lines. See, in modern war, you don't stop the fighting to gather in the harvest or retire to winter quarters. You keep fighting. And in this modern war, wounded men have been returned to the lines by the thousands, the tens of thousands. But this was supposed to be a short war. So for the last 6 or 7 months, the US government has been racking its brains to somehow share the burden of it around. For it really is only a few, relatively speaking, who are bearing that burden. Sure, there's R&R, that 5-day period out of the lines and in Japan. And it was great for a while. It was a total morale boost. 5 days, bathing and sleeping. And before you disagree, no, it is not I, intercourse and intoxication. Not here in 1951. The fighting was pretty solid the first half of the year. And if you've spent months or even weeks in constant hard combat, you're not looking for trouble on your 5 days off. In a shorter war, those 5 days, yeah, they'd be fine. But now it's not enough. The men are wondering about real rotation, going home. And slowly but surely, the first men who came here to fight this war are going home, and now men are replacing them. They have a point system. It takes 36 points to rotate. On the front lines, you get 4 points a month. Anywhere in the general combat zone, from an artillery battery or maybe regimental headquarters, you get 3. Anybody else, even the service troops all the way back at Busan, they still get 2 points. So even they should rotate out at 18 months service. An average infantryman should get out in 12. The thing about this system is that while it has its advantages and allows the men to see a light at the end of the tunnel, it has a real downside. Who wants to risk his life when he has 30 points and only needs 6 to go home? By now, dealing with men who have nearly enough points to go home is a real problem for a lot of commanders. And think of the guys who also realize that a promotion puts them way back down the list. Here's the story, another thing from Fehrenbach, excellent writer, about a colonel who's been in Korea almost the whole war. He's all set to leave, and he's happy to go. And then he gets 1 star as he's promoted to brigadier general just before he ships out. What a great way to recognize his service, right? And then he's told that as a general, he's on a different rotation list, and now he's the general officer who has the least service in the whole Far East. So he's not going home for quite some time. Think how that feels. And also realize this, from the day the peace talks begin, the main interest of pretty much every foreign soldier here is going home. And this as well, the composition of the army has been changing with rotation. The men coming now are draftees, National Guardsmen, guys who work on farms or for the city or run small businesses, ordinary guys brought over to the main lines. Most line units by now have fewer than 40% regulars manning them, and the new guys are not exactly enthusiastic to be there. The American people as a whole are no longer enthusiastic about this war, and neither are the new guys that can only be described as green. The lessons of Korea can only really be learned in Korea. We shall see how well they fight as the summer wears on, I guess. But this is a quite different army from even that which stopped the enemy offensives in April and May. And with that to ponder, I will end this week of the war. A week of serious and bloody fighting in the field for Koreans, both Northerners and Southerners, and the Kaesong peace talks being broken off, perhaps for good. And yeah, it seems it was a rigged situation for the communists to use as an excuse to break them off. But I'll ask again, why? And why now? Maybe they do want to try to get something in San Francisco. Maybe they think, though, that they've built up enough that they don't need any talks because they think they can win this war, or at least they cannot lose, cannot be totally defeated in the field, and can at least maintain a stalemate, can show the world that they can fight off the US, the whole UN, that they are a major, major power. If that is true, though, then how long will this war go on? And how long will brutal battles for places like Bloody Ridge, places that don't really affect the overall scheme of things all that much, go on? You got me. But who knows how the overall scheme of things in the Korean War will look as things roll on. Well, I'll be there to cover it all, of course, thanks to the Time Ghost Army. That's what keeps the lights on here. Tony Westbrook is the Time Ghost Army Member of the Week for this channel. You too can join the Army at timeghost.tv or patreon.com. Do not forget to subscribe. See you next time.